Can I begin because I can't hear? All right. Thank you so much, Shanmu sir, for such a warm and introduction about me. Good morning to one and all, and welcome to the webinar. And I'm very glad that you could take the time to come and listen to this webinar on demystifying Generation Z. Let me just quickly share my screen on the presentation. I hope you guys can see the presentation. Is it viewable? So there's this usually just across when we interact with students or in generally my work with consulting with many of the firms is this particular generation which is regular in terms of they are. And we always wonder what kind of situations they present to us or how do they think or what they do. So this whole idea of me to demystify this particular generation is to understand how they come from, what kind of synergies they have, what behaviors they present, and how this could affect educational institutes and also the work atmosphere. So let's quickly jump into it. One of the first slides talks about who they are and where they come from. So, Generation Z is the first wired generation. So, when I say wired generation, they are a generation which belong and work and are totally involved in their particular smartphones. So if you look at them, they are born between 1997 to 2012, and they fall between the ages of 7 and 21. Generation Z is coming of age in a time of global unrest. They are present in terms of technology. And although many may be quick to deem them as millennials 2.0, that could not be further from the truth. But the visual impacts of climate change, fake news, the hashtag Me Too trend, all these have impacted their course on who they are. As just young children during Great Recession, Gen Zers or Gen Zers saw the impact on value hard work and seek to create meaningful careers, but are also marked by a sense of frugality, not seen among experience seeking. The Generation Z is 96%, as I said, own a smartphone. and most of them don't remember a time when they have not seen technology or not used phones. Using headphones, something which their average comes to between 4 to 5 hours, they are so hooked on to technology. Gen Z has been described as the loneliest generation, yet they are highly connected and use technology and a myriad of platforms to enhance their experience, which are beyond the reach of a general life. With technology at their fingertips 24 by 7, they are very well informed. The world is larger, but in their hands, they feel their voices are very, very loud. So the omnipresent influence of technology is very, very high. So if you look at this particular side as to how much do they use phones and what they do. So IBM, along with National Research Foundation, did a survey of close to 12,500 participants across 18 nations and came up with this particular result. So 73% of them use their mobile phones or mobile devices for texting and chatting. 59% access entertainment. I'm sure most of you, or rather my colleagues in the education industry, would affirm to this that most of the time your students might be busy with their phones playing one of those games or always being on social media on Snapchat or Instagram. So this kind of proves the theory that they are always hooked on. 58%, as I said, also play games. 36% use it for doing schoolwork or homework. 28% learn new things, and close to 17% use it for shopping and browsing. So, cell phone or mobile devices being connected is a huge and very entirety in their entirety plays a very big part in their lives. What are the other names which we know them? So they are also known as post millennials because they come after millennials. I will probably talk about the generations, how they are or what they are. I'll probably let you know on what kind of generations existed before the Generation Z. They are also known as the I generation or the information generation, also known as Generation Edge and sharing generation. So I generation because they are in an age where information is freely available, and most of them use these mobile devices to use to access this generation at a very very earlier stages. They are also called Generation Edge because they belong to an era where they are not easily pushed over. They kind of tend to realize how factors, social factors, and other factors affect them, so they take it on their face value. They are also a generation which shares a lot of information. So you will see maximum that this generation like to share things. So these are the other names with through which Generation Z are known: post millennials, I generation, Generation Edge, and sharing generation. So before we get into how this generation came into, we need to understand how this theory came. So Karl Mannheim is a German sociologist in the year 1952, came up with the generational theory. He came up with a cohort or a social generation, which is defined as a group of people born within a similar age, uh, and who belong to experience the same historical events, I beg your pardon, and in the same time period. And he believed that this theory is an aggregate of how people born over a span of roughly 20 years or about the length of one phase of life, from childhood to young adulthood, midlife, and then the old age. So the important criteria which he kind of discussed in this particular generational theory are the age, the location which they were part of, the history in which they were again involved in, and common beliefs and behavior. So this has a huge impact on what this generational theory is. So let's come back to the types of generation. So if we look at the types of generations, they are classified into four generations. The fifth generation is just begun. So we'll talk about that later. So there were baby boomers who were born between 1940 to 1959. There is a debatable on the amount of years which they are up and down, but that's fine. And then there is the Generation X, which belongs to 1960 to 1979. And then there is the Generation Y, or the Millennials, from 1980 to 1996. And obviously, we are discussing Generation Z or Z from 1997 to 2012. So baby boomers are the ones who uh, began the part of industrial revolution, as we know. They were mostly children, or mostly people who were born during the post-war, because of 1940 to 59. They were very key. They were introduced to a lot of contentions around dictatorship. They were very idealistic in their ways, how they were. They were very revolutionary, and they are the ones who gave, or were extremely important in beginning of the industrial revolution. And most of the companies which we see in the world today began during this era. Certainly the management has changed, and the ways how we look at the management, or the way how we look at work, has changed in this course of time. But they were the guys who actually began this particular course of theories of how we look at management. Then comes the Generation X from 1960 to 79. These people, the context in which they were involved is more of political transition. They were more capitalistic. They were sharing more information into dominating the particular areas and wherever they worked. They were very materialistic, competitive, and also very, very individualistic. If you see, most of this generation went after status, they went after brands, they went after cars, they were very keen to acquire luxury items. And Generation Y, where the millennial generation, were more globalized. If you see, most of us, I belong to Generation Y, I'm a millennial. So most of us were given the opportunity to learn from other countries, to learn from other employees who were coming from different parts of other countries into India, and in Indian employees going to other parts in different parts of the world. So there was a healthy exchange of information. So the globalization truly impacted us into the way how we look at things. There was economic stability during our times. The true emergence of internet actually hit us. So the foundation for Generation Z in terms of how they look at internet came. We were truly very globalist. Uh, Most of us on our generation were very question oriented. So we wanted to understand how we behave and what kind of questions we need to ask to understand information. We also craved for experience. Most of us took the time to travel abroad. Most of us took the time to visit other countries to see and learn from other uh, cultures. We participated in many festivals. We wanted to travel. So these are some of the particular characteristics of this generation. And obviously, Generation Z, we are going to look more closely into how they are. So these are the four generations: baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and Generation Z. So what about the numbers? So if you look at numbers, Generation Z, or the people who are born after 96, they comprised of close to 32% of the global population of 7.7 last year. And there is a clear difference as to how much impact they will have on education systems and on work. So they are clearly surging ahead in terms of numbers, ahead of millennials. According to 2014 UN report, India would have the largest youth population, with close to 356 million people in the age group of 10 to 25 years. And by 2020, India will officially, or rather, become the youngest country with 64% of its population in this particular age group. So most of the language or the communication lingos which they might use is family. They use it as fam. They also believe in FOMO, fear of missing out, and YOLO, you only live once. So these are the kind of terms and particular communication terms which they might be using. So India, China, and US, Russia also, these are certain countries where there are maximum number of young people. India definitely standing at the topmost along with China in terms of very young people. So how are they different? So definitely there is a huge difference between how generation X or a baby boomer or Y. So most of the time we tend to disengage in terms of figuring out why do they act like this. So there are certain characteristics which might help us in understanding how they are different. So Gen Z is very individualistic. So most of the people who are between this particular age group tend to be very, very personal. They like to have things on their own. I'm sure during one of the classes, if I'm sure my colleagues would agree here, during one of the questions, if you ask them to find some information, you would see that quickly by the end of the class or by the end of the hour, they might have Googled it and they might have the answers ready, and they might come up with a counter question to whatever you have answered or asked. So they are very, very focused on what they want and how they want. And with the use of information technology, specifically with mobile devices and the influx of technology, they are very easily able to answer these questions and come up with different scenarios which are challenging to a previous generation. They are very financially conscious. Most of us think that they don't know about money, but that is far from the truth. Most of them actually know what money is. They have clear priorities and understanding where and how to invest. They might not exactly know the avenues, but they are very, very conscious about what money plays a very important part in their lives. The reason being because most of them have seen their earlier parents or the earlier generation struggle in terms of economy. So they have aligned their business, they have aligned their thoughts in managing money in such a way that they are becoming more conscious about how to use these finances. And obviously, they have a very global outlook. No longer is the purview of a particular geography stopping them from not knowing things. A person sitting in Hyderabad might know what is happening in the US, and there is this culture of following various celebrities. So the pop culture, as we say, is so huge. So somebody like a singer of potential of, let's say, of a Kanye West, if he's singing some hip hop song in US, a student who might be based in India would obviously listen to him, follow him on Instagram, follow the same fashion or the philosophies which they are exhibiting. A classic example would be the Me Too campaign or the Ice Bucket Challenge, though it had no relations to the particular syndrome in India, but it was a huge hit across social platform. Many of them not knowing about what exactly that particular Ice Bucket Challenge was, but they still did the challenge anyways. So there is a huge information exchange between this particular generations with their peers and colleagues across the world. One of the other factors which is something which I personally feel is very important for me as a person, somebody who hires this generation, or even when I teach in classes, is most of them lack work experience because of our educational system and the way how our system has been set up. Most of them do not get an opportunity to work. It's because of the various rigorous processes or the systems put in place for them to be in college. They don't get much chance to work. Unfortunately, the corporates look at it in a very different way. They would really like someone to come with work experience. So that is something which is very much lacking. As I said earlier, this is the most tech savvy generation. So there is solution for them. They have information to search on various spectrums of life. So if they want to date, there is apps which are available for dating. If they want to find some information related to a particular information which they are looking at, there is information for that. The application development has seen a huge increase across the spaces, let it be on iOS or on Android. This particular generation knows exactly how to tap those particular apps and use it for their benefit. So they are very, very tech savvy in understanding and usage of generations, which we could not do in earlier. This generation is also struggling for identity because they are in between a time when Generation X or a millennial is telling them what to do. So most of them do not tend to understand, or there is a gap of communication between what they perceive as right, between what we tell them what it is. So this could lead to an identity crisis. This could also lead to an identity for them to understand what they are and how they are. The reason being, this particular generation is the most unique and different from any other generation before. So there is bound to be some confusion. There's bound to be some sort of a doubt into where they come from. So it plays. So here, this is where the earlier generation needs to understand how to communicate and talk to this particular generation. This generation is also very, very health conscious. If you see, most of them follow, certain trainers online. They have applications which they have on their phones, which they track their health, which they track. So they keep they keep abreast of how their particular health are. Very, very health conscious generation. They are also the most creative oriented. So this is where most of the challenges exist for somebody like me or someone like our generation. We might tell them to do a particular problem or a particular question which we give to them. They might come up with an entirely different solution or an entirely different scenarios. But the problem is, when we have been taught in a particular fashion, we tend to impose that onto this particular generation. So there is bound to be, as I said earlier, there is bound to be a differences of opinion. But if we are able to tap into this particular generations on their creative process, it could lead to new groundbreaking theories. It could lead to new groundbreaking philosophies or products which are available. So it could make a huge difference into how the world is currently operating. So across different spectrums, across the educational institutes or the corporates need to really look into how they are planning to tap this particular creative processes which this particular generation brings onto the table. Uh, this generation also is very poor at memorizing things. They are very, very poor in learning things. The reason being, again, as we say, technology can be a boon and bane. Most of them have access to technology, so they don't tend to memorize it because it's on a need per basis. I'm sure many of us remember, during our school or college days, we used to remember the phone numbers or addresses of our friends. The same is not necessarily required for the current generation, because this generation just needs to do everything on a phone. I mean, I remember we could remember close to 10 or 15 phone numbers, but right now it's just not required because everything they have a calculator, they have scientific calculators, they have so many apps created within in their phone. So this particular generation doesn't necessarily need to memorize things to the level which we did. And one of the very important of this generation is they are looking for multitasking. They are not bound to do one thing at one time. They are very, very happy and they are very, very skilled in doing various things. You might be familiar with how they use phones in one area and all the time. So they could be a huge impact as to how we could, help them by helping them become more multitasking. So there is a huge gap in this area in terms of how a particular employer or an educational institute needs to step up to tap this particular quality in multitasking. So Generation Z is very, very multitasking. They are also visual learners. This is something which is very challenging because most of us are used to solving problems on our own through pen and paper, or using technology in teaching methodologies, or in corporates where they use tools or online resources for teaching their particular employees in helping them understanding how works are done. But to what extent are they visual is the question. So, which because this generation is more visual based, we need to come up with various pedagogy or methodologies to make it more visually appealing to them. So, if the particular information which we want to share with them are more visual, are more captivating, there is the high chances that Gen Z would actually accept this particular philosophies or particular information which you share with them. One of the other downsides, I read a meme the other day where they say this is a learning from WhatsApp University. There's there's this tendency to just accept anything which comes at face value. So the information shared to you or to anybody, this generation just blindly happens to believe whatever comes. I'm sure we have seen the dark sides of it, where there have been a, a recent incident in Bangalore where there was a dispute which happened because of similar situations where the information was shared. This has been happening in the last couple of years also because of the heavy usage of WhatsApp for sharing information, which has no particular authenticity to it. So this generation is very poor in learning to verify the information. So if we as educators, if we as animators are able to help them in verifying the information or helping them in understanding what true. So the next is very important thing is how does this affect education? If you look at the particular attention span when they have, uh, according to a survey which we I kind of looked into, they have an 8-second attention span. 8 second is a very less amount of attention span to us. So they are extremely frugal in trying to figure out what is happening. And with this kind of an attention span, it becomes a huge challenge for us as educators to keep them engaged. They also learn best by doing or by creating. And again, this is again a huge challenge because the current educational system into which I have seen may not be accessible to this particular. I'm sure the engineering colleges or polytechnic or technical courses have this facility. There are many other institutes, specifically during in the B schools, where I've seen most of them follow this methodology. I'm sure there are still some young or upcoming nascent level colleges which might not be blessed with such kind of infrastructure, but this is something which we need to clearly look into as to how can we engage this particular generation by helping them to do the things which we want them to learn, rather than just by using a chalk and talk or a particular information which we share them across and just expect them to do it. But if we are able to create an environment where they are able to do what we teach them, I think that would something be very beneficial to them. Again, this generation is choosing to learn to figure out what they want in their particular life, or any particular higher education which they want to choose is dependent on their passion. This generation is looking to follow their passion. If somebody wants to be an animation designer, so he will definitely look into courses. He will definitely looking into colleges which are able to provide this particular skill sets to him, along with the regular classes or regular courses, or the regular particular knowledge base which is available. So skill based learning, I think something which we have all learned during one of the accreditation processes, which I'm sure most of us must be doing, which will also be a very huge impact in this particular generation. This generation is also is very passive. They're not very active. They don't want to be very active in terms of how they want to be in terms of learning. They're very passive learners. And something which is very unique is they don't necessarily believe that if they study in a college that they have to be successful. So this particular generation tends to be very self education minded. So they believe that I don't need to go to college to become successful. So most of them skill sets or the kind of education or the learnings which they can listen or to get from the various sources of technology which they already have at their disposal, they can be better off at that. And it's very surprising to note that YouTube stands as one of the largest medium where they learn their information from. So YouTube is king here. So technology is no longer transformative, but it has become a very normal, very regular, integral part of this particular generation's life. Somebody like me, when we were in school or in colleges, when technology was introduced to us, it was something magical to us. But the current generation doesn't look at it. It has become so normal. I mean, even my daughter, who's in school right now, is able to operate a laptop. I'm sure many of your children or many of the other younger generation has access to mobile phones, to notepads, so many other information things which are easily available for them, where they're able to access information from these particular sources. So YouTube is certainly one of the most sought after platform through which this particular generation is learning. Although they are digital natives, they are so hooked on to technology. What is very fascinating is yet they still believe in, still want somebody to tell them, they still want some sort of a guidance into understanding this particular phenomenon is very unique, but they still require some sort of guidance. So even though they are so attached to this technology and various other sources of information which are available, this particular generation still values the teaching learning methods. This generation also is very, very critical about having feedback. They really do appreciate how feedback is given. And when I say feedback, feedback which can be implemented. Uh, this generation is looking for feedback which helps them change the way how they are. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a feedback which might impact them somewhere in the future, but something which impacts them right away. So they want feedback from the faculty or their particular managers or wherever they work from to help them to learn what they want to and how they want to. So feedback is something which is very, very important. I'm sure we look at feedback very normally in our day-to-day lives, but here this particular feedback is rigorous. It is very regular. So they are looking at feedback every day or maybe during the class, or if somebody has done well, they need an appreciation or a pat or a back. It could be positive or negative, but feedback is something which this particular generation really does appreciate. So the question comes is skills, but do we have these skills and are they meant for life? So when I say skills, then there is a huge impact on how it affects this particular generation. Are these skills in line with learnability? Does this help them become curious in their avenues of what they want to know? And does it help them to become agile? So, if you look at the global educational systems, there's this model of German educational system where during their school time, during their school between the 7th and the 10th to 12th grade, in the German educational system, specific skill sets are introduced very early during the school's period itself. So here we talk about choice-based system in our universities. So this is something which is followed in German schools from a very early age. So a child at the age of 12 or 13 is introduced to mechanical engineering while he is in a school. So if he wants to learn about machines, if he wants to learn about cars, he can pick that up skill set right during the school's time. And that is the reason why I'm sure most of us agree that the German cars are the best cars across the world. There could be obviously debatable on this, but we all know that Germans make things very, very well. And uh, this particular school system, which helps them become better during their skill sets or the skill sets which they acquire during their schools has a huge impact into the way how they choose their courses when they move to a higher education of their post graduation or graduation. So skill sets really needs to be a part of a regular course. This particular generation is looking up to this particular skill sets which are going to affect them in their lives. And learnability, curiosity, and agility is something which they are very, very keen on. So a skill set which can be easily learnable, which also helps them to be curious. So it doesn't need to be something which we need to impose, but if we are able to create a platform where they themselves come forward and ask for these courses, and where we are able to present this, if this could be done, then it could make a huge difference. Here in agility, when I mean the differences in following two or three different courses and able to manage those particular things. I'm sure some of us are still understanding the new educational policy where a student can basically study 2 degrees, one in the regular full time and the other in the part time program. So I think this is a very important right step for our particular generation. So, how can educational institute deal with this particular generation, or how can we become more conducive for this generation? I'm sure many of the institutes or the corporate colleges or the business schools are already doing this. But if they have not done, if they plan to do, if they are in their early nascent stages of their particular courses, then increasing corporate to campus engagement is the first way to look at it. Somebody like a consultant who wants to hire, somebody like me who wants to hire a consultant from a college, I would definitely not be keen to hire somebody who has absolutely no experience in doing any particular work. They might have certificate courses, they might have courses which are given by institutes themselves. But if I have a knowledge, or if I am knowing that this particular institute or is corporately aligned with a particular corporate or a business organization, I would tend to look at that institute in a very different perspective. What I mean by this is, excuse me, is that if there is a corporate present in this particular campus, then I know there is certain element of information or dissemination of information from the corporates to the college, and from college to the students, and the students are able to align their thoughts into what they might be expected in corporates. So how can we do this? So I'm sure many of the institutes or colleges are already doing this, but this is for the generic knowledge. Let's probably discuss this. So, sponsor college events. So, if there are institutes, some of you who are able to to talk to corporates, ask them to sponsor any event. Ask them to get in their footprint into your particular campuses. Ask them to give guest lectures on a regular basis, especially if it's a business school, or if you have a bachelor's in business management or an MBA or a diploma course. It is very important that the student not only learns from you, but also from the corporates at a very regular interval. It shouldn't be a guest lecture because it is a guest lecture. It should be a lecture which should be a rigorous, regular course of interaction for them. It should be normalized for them. So, if possible, please tap into the alumni who have already graduated. Make sure that there is a connect between the earlier passed out faculty members or generations who are able to help you in establishing this. Career counseling needs to happen at a very earlier level. Right from the first semester or the first year, if a student is able to understand what that particular course is going to help him, and in terms of what career avenues or where opportunities exist, I think this should really help. So this particular generation appreciate this concept of knowing where they want to. Life projects, I'm sure this is a very generic term which we have discussed. Engineering colleges and most of the management colleges tend to get companies to do it. Most of the live projects should not be something we do in campus. If possible, if they are able to step out of their campuses and get projects within companies, even though if it's a small project, if it's a survey or any particular thing which they are able to do beyond the spectrum of the college. I think that is something aligned with a particular corporate. I think that's something which, again, the Generation Z would really appreciate. Corporate competitions, hackathons, these are something which, again, which we need to encourage, if not regularly, if monthly once, if you could get corporates to get some sort of a business survey or a new product development competition. Hackathons doesn't necessarily needs to be IT centric hackathon. It could also be coming up with different ideas into solving today's problems or business issues or cases, which could help students to look at things differently. Basically think out of the box, which we tell them usually. But if they're able to solve these particular issues from a different perspective and come out with such solutions or policies, that could be of huge benefit. Obviously, campus drives are something which are very, very elementary. So companies have to come to the colleges for you to benefit. These things play a huge important role. Pre-placement talks, if the CEO or the executive management is able to come and make an impression on this particular generation, it really inspires them to be more focused into what they want to do in their particular lives, whether be it in terms of entrepreneurship or in terms of joining a particular corporate. Pre-placement offers, again, if offers are given, this will again spark an interest or a sense of competition among students to better one among each other. So these are certain traits which the institutes could put in mind, or policies which they can sit down with management to come up, help this particular generation become more campus to corporate, bridge this particular gap. I think that would be a huge benefit. So the whole point of doing this is to create a learning and interactive ecosystem. When I say creating a learning and interactive ecosystem, it is very crucial that we adopt online learning modules. If not already, I'm sure some of you are already using Google Classrooms, Microsoft Meet. This particular webinar is also happening on Zoom. So there are a bunch of other tools which are also available online, which could be accessed for students to become more dynamic into how they are. Contents which could be made, which can be more concise and which can be delivered with the use of mobile technologies. I'm sure some of us have debated if mobile devices or phones can be used in the classroom. I think this is a big debate which has happened. I'm sure there are a lot of people who still don't tend to agree. Definitely, I'm a student on this. Mobile devices should, if it could be tapped in the right sense, could be beneficial to students in engaging them, rather than asking them to not use them. But if we find a platform where, if those mobile devices can be used progressively in understanding with an online model, if something could be done, that is something which will be really appreciated. We need to collaborate to create. We need to work with external experts and functional experts, and this should be a normality. This should become normal. It shouldn't be incidental. It shouldn't be something which we do because we had to do it. It's very, very critical in today's times that experts comes from outside to not just impart information, but also to create a real life scenario for our students to understand where they are and where they tend to. Most of the business management students whom I have interacted have this very um, kind of Alice in Wonderland syndrome, where they feel that if they do their degrees or if they do their particular certificates, they are ready to go and get a job and they become managers. Unfortunately, this is not the truth, and this is not how corporates or your respective worlds beyond colleges are looking at. So there is a huge difference in learning what you learn in colleges versus how we look at work in the corporates. So if very early, if there is a collaborative learning which will help students to bridge the gap between the corporate to campus, this particular gap, then I think it will be a huge help. So external experts, functional experts, management experts, if they are able to come regularly to impact colleges from a management college perspective, I think if that is done, that could be a huge benefit. And this could be one of the pillars in creating this particular ecosystems. And again, assessments which are we know today in present time our assessments in India are not up to the mark, which are which we might compare with somebody from a US or a European context. This criterias or the assessment which we do needs to be more dynamic, needs to be more present. We need to understand that assessment needs to be very regular course of a student life. Most of us have been tuned or rather aligned to being assessed over a period of time. Let's say we have our regular class tests, assignments, which the student already knows. So he already knows that there is an assignment during this particular time, or there is already a particular policies which are kept. So please put it on mute, please. So if this assessments, if they make are more instant, and this is where my belief in, if mobile devices, if you could use them to assess a test online with the phone and give them an activity and conduct the results on the same time, I think that could something be a game changer into how a student looks at us, a student looks as an institute. So this learning and interactive ecosystem could really change the way how we interact with this particular generation. So let's talk about how corporates or the companies are looking at this particular generation. I would probably be talking about only two areas. There are many other areas which are in focus, but I'm going to talk about how recruitment, motivation, retention, and the organizational culture will be impacted by this particular generation. Firstly, the company needs to create a brand which is engaging to this particular generation. So across all spectrums. So we know that this generation is very digitally active. So if this particular generation is able to interact with the companies across the social media platform, be it Facebook or Instagram or YouTube, I think that would be very beneficial for corporates. I'm sure many of the companies, even a hospital, is maintaining websites, being on Facebook, because that is the kind of reach which they are able to get with the current generation. So the companies really need to look into how they form their brands and to reach out to this particular generation Z across all different platforms. Secondly, they need to be very transparent. They need to have a perspective where they are very honest about what they are. They need to have a very clear description about what they plan to do and what they are, what kind of mission, vision, or values they have for each of these particular values or products which they have. They need to have a shared values. They need to be very upfront regarding what they expect from their particular products or services which they are, and it should be unique across all the areas. If they are very transparent, then this particular generation will be very appreciative of this companies. They need to obviously create a unique selling proposition or a USP. If the companies are creating innovative products, they are creating innovative spectrums, they are creating innovative philosophies or corporate cultures, this would really appeal to current generation. So we have looked at Facebook, we have looked at companies like Oracle and Google. They have entirely changed the way in the way how they recruit people. They have changed the way how their organizations work. I'm sure we must have all seen how Mark Zuckerberg comes to office on just in a regular T-shirt, and he sits, regularly with his employees. There is no specific cabins or a specific special treatment given to him. And most of the American companies follow more or less similar work culture. So this kind of culture, though it's still drilling down, and the water down effect is still coming to India. I'm sure there are many companies, the present now companies, Gen Z specific companies, which are also following certain norms which are like this. So if you create a very unique atmosphere for your particular companies, then the current generation Z would be very, very keen to join these companies. So innovative technologies, innovations would really aspire also to help in retaining more of these employees. Early engagement, as I said, it is very, very important for the corporates to engage with institutes where via a campus to corporate program, or through uh, one of those companies which comes for a job. So if any of these are, if they are able to do it very early with the institutes, informing these, then I think it would be very, very beneficial. So early engagement is key. Corporates need to get engaged to good colleges, to impact the kind of young people which they want in their particular companies to come. They need to develop outreach programs. Internships have to be given. If they are able to appoint campus ambassadors who could talk about corporate bodies or their particular companies across to different students groups, if they are able to create these fairs or any particular projects, if they are able to give to this particular institutes, or to the students, then again this could be very beneficial to the corporates. So outreach programs, reaching out to corporates, this is something which should be again normal for benefiting this particular generation. Career paths. Most of the Generation Z today want to know where they head. They want to understand where they will be in 1 year time, 2 year time, 3 years, or 5 years down the line. Our generation, my generation, our previous generation were very happy to stay in a stable job, get good salary, and get a stability in our lives. But this generation looks at jobs differently. They want to look to a company if they are able to do multiple work, if they have a collaborative atmosphere. Are they giving you an opportunity to work across different spectrums? An engineering student who joins would like to dab into a management role or a techno-functional role. These are some things which this particular generation would be very keen to notice in a particular company. So the human resources or the human experiences department really needs to step up to understand what this particular generation craves for and wants. So career path, or a ladder, which we used to discuss earlier on, needs to be very clear in terms of what we give to them, what role they are expected to do, what are the objectives, aims, and what on accomplishment of this particular aims would help them to become. So this is something the companies really need to invest in when they hire this particular generation. Today's generation are extremely optimistic, guys, about their future. So they look at jobs as something which they can do. They are somebody who they believe that they can make an impact. So they are very optimistic. They are very progressive. They are very aggressive regarding how they feel about jobs. So how can this be different? So there are certain snippets or certain data which I thought I could share with you. Uh, with 66% of age group between 16 to 24-year-old workers in India are seriously considering to leave their jobs because they are not very happy, or because the kind of outlook which they had regarding towards a particular company was not something which they thought it would be. Indian Gen Z workers expect to be working at least 5 companies in their lifetime, 4 for overall. Uh, Retention is something which is going to be a major challenge for most of the companies, with 56% agreeing that they want to leave this particular job for a better job. So there is a huge challenge for companies to retaining this particular generation, and to keeping them motivated and to retain them. So there is a huge challenge up ahead for companies to see how they are able to operate. So how can companies change the environment and make it better? So they need to look into making an environment which is trust based. They need to have a dialogue. They need to have managers who are ready to sit down with an employee and talk to them regarding what is expected to them. Most of the time, during the early phases of their lives, if you see during in a corporate phase, there is very minimal intervention in terms of managers' suggestions on or how they look into their particular jobs. I mean, when I joined my first job, it was understood that I had to do something. Things were given to me, the objectives were told me what to be achieved, but there was never any interaction between me and my manager at a fairly regular level. I'm sure for all the professionals, it was the same way around. It's only during the course of our lives, progressing into our jobs, did we really understand what we were supposed to do. So this has to change. The companies need to come out with practices, with policies where managers regularly sit with an entry level employee and create a trust based work environment. They need to actively recognize and implement feedback mechanisms. When I say feedback mechanisms, this doesn't need to be a performance objective. This doesn't need to be something to be done at the end of the quarter or at the end of the year where their performance is measured. Performance measurement is important, but what is more something very critical for this generation is to have feedback which tells the employee what really he needs to do and how he could shape up his job. uh, Again, work life balance and competitive benefits are something which this particular generation is very keen on. So not only do this generation want good money, but they want money which is better than anybody else, and they want it at the luxury of doing it at their own space and time. So if you are creating an environment where they're able to work effectively, staying at home, flexibility of doing their shifts whenever they want to, and paying them at the level which they feel is good enough from an industry standpoint, then it will create a very holistic environment for them to join your particular company. Employee experience. This is the next evolutionary for human resources. So, employee experience really needs to come forth in terms of making the jobs, environment, and the whole cohesive work atmosphere into a much better sense of experience to this particular generation at a much better level. If the human resources or the become better, then the employees or this particular generation would be really be happy in working with them. So I would like to conclude here by saying that perspective which we have learned today in understanding how Generation Z are in terms of how they impact a work atmosphere versus a college atmosphere is something which we have not clearly looked into. But if you are able to understand how they are and how they relate, I think this could be a huge benefit to us as animators or as managers. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, we could take it.
Just what's the new regulation? What's the new regulation? Let me check.
How we interact with students. So if there are outside classroom activities, if you are able to involve them, as I said, this particular generation craves learning by doing. So if you are able to create an environment where your particular concept could be taught, something which you could help them do from a group perspective, where they're able to learn by something which they can do, I think that could really make a difference into how they look at learning. A typical PowerPoint presentation or writing on the chalkboard would not really create an impact like it did to us. So there has to be newer pedagogies where you could come up with different ideologies to create group-based behavior tactics or particular activities which are outside the classroom. That could be one thing which you could do. Also, if you are able to use mobile devices in your classrooms, if it is allowed, I'm sure many of the universities or colleges do not allow you to use mobile devices. But if you could create a forum or a platform where they use mobile devices, where you're engaging them personally into doing that particular activity, I think that could be hugely beneficial in getting their attention back into whatever you are planning to learn.
Thank you, sir. Sir, another question we got from Nigeria. She is asking, please, how the online learning system will influence the students.
Thank you for your question. So, online learning is something which is very critical right now because I'm sure many of us have already used Google Classrooms in this current pandemic situation. But you also need to understand that this is how it's going to be in the future. So online learning is something which has become a regular kind of a scenarios abroad already. So most of the American institutes, if you look at the European or from an American perspective, the faculty do not use classrooms very aggressively like how we do in India or from an Asian perspective. I'm sure it could be different in different areas. I'm generically speaking, but if I look at my friends or colleagues who have studied in the American colleges, faculty do not take active classes. They make sure the students already know about the classes by taking an online lecture. So most of the faculty members have already videotaped their particular lectures and put it online. So what the student does is he basically learns a 35 or a 40-minute lecture in maybe 15 or 20-minute concise format, comes up to the class for basically understanding the concept from a Q&A perspective. So he's not coming to college, he's not coming to institute to talk to lecture about what that particular concept is, but he already knows that concept. So online learning is something where he learns all this already. So this could be again a very simple concept which can be utilized in various institutes in India too, where you specifically don't need to have lectures for 45 to 50 minutes. You could always make a video and keep them. And assignments or assessment could also be part of it. Once the student is sitting at home, is able to see that particular video, if you have a short 5 or 2 seconds questions which he can answer, then you have immediately are getting a feedback from the student. So not only do you know at the level of education in terms of understanding what the student knows about the concept, but the next day when he is able to meet you, you can gauge his response and his mental faculty. So online tools is something which we really need to come up with in terms of managing and reaching out to them.
Thank you. Sir, another question we got from Vipayan Ghosh. He is asking that so much misinformation nowadays throughout social media. How should Generation Z be aware for that?
So yeah, that's a very excellent question. Thank you, sir. I think the present generation needs to have certain guidance in helping them learn the true efficacy or the authenticity of this particular information. I'm sure in India there is this very poor trend of following anything that comes on WhatsApp. I'm sure there is a joke which goes around where somebody said that Janagana Mana is the best voted album, the anthem in the world, and we tend to agree to it without knowing. So there are so many things which comes on WhatsApp we just blindly believe. I think this is where, as an educator, as an animator, I think we should step up and help identify the sources and help them. I'm sure during many of the assignments which my fellow colleagues here would have given to students, many of them would have gone to Wikipedia to get those details. And across industry, we all know that Wikipedia is not the authentic source of information. I mean, basically anybody could change whatever is there in Wikipedia. So as a very small step, you could give them or tell them the authentic sources. Like what I do during one of my classes is to let students discover authentic sources of information online. For example, if I ask a student, say, hey Manoj, where do you want to go when you grow up? So if he says, sir, I love to go to Italy, so I would tell him, what are the things do you want to know about Italy? So which information would you see or rather check online? So he would say, sir, probably I will look into Wikipedia or one of those tourist websites. So I would tend to tell him or guide him to see, why not look into CIA? CIA is the intelligent authorities of the United States government. Why not look into Italy's government websites, their own particular websites which are government based? Why don't you look into those sites? So if you are able to help them in understanding the differences between what could be just a rumor versus an authentic source of information and guide them, I think then it would be a great step in creating this particular.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, sorry, I got muted. I'm back.
Okay. Sir, thank you very much, sir. We got very much information and loads of vote of thanks are going on from our participants. They are all thanking you for wonderful webinar. They learned a lot. And now I will invite Dr. Sanmugam Raman, HOD of School of Management from Pratap University for the vote of thanks.
Thank you. I would take this opportunity to thank the department and Pratap University, Dr. Shanmuga sir, Mr. Avin Vama, and everybody else in the IT team who was involved in this. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Good afternoon, one and all. Before I know, I stay between you and lunch. On behalf of Pratap University, I take this opportunity to propose vote of thanks to all participants all over the world. Once again, thank you very much. Your contribution and your precious time. The webinar on Generation is a DEMYSTIFIED, organized by School of Management Studies. At the outset, I thank our guest and resource person, Mr. Manoj D. Clarence. We are really enlightened with your knowledge and presence. It went down about the difference of generation resort. Generation resort is individualistic, financially conscious, global outlook, lack of work, experience, the most tech-savvy generation, struggling for identity, health conscious, creative, thought process. They don't memorize, multitask, visual learner, and how does affects the students and the steps taken by the education institution are really more informative and useful for us. Creating learning and interactive ecosystem input given by you was very awesome. We are thankful to our honorable founder, chairman for their motivation. I would like to thank our Deputy Registrar for his enthusiastic support. A special thanks to organizing committee, Dean Academics, Mr. Simachal Panda, coordinator of the event, Mr. Dev Singh, head of the IT and brand manager, and then Mr. Arvind, assistant coordinator for the IT team, Mr. Abhishek, technical persons for the IT team, teaching and non-teaching staff for their unflinching support and coordination. Our heartfelt thanks to our students for active participation. Once again, I'm thanking you to all the participants. With this warm words and a kind message, we move to the end of today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for once again to all.